Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women Who Code podcast. My name is Anna-Shur Wilson, and I am the program manager for career navigation here at Women Who Code. And I'm so excited to be talking today with Emily Doswell, all about landing your first job, retraining, and handling rejection along the way. So I'm so excited to get started on our conversation. Whenever I talk to people that are working in software, working as an engineer, I always like to know like what first sparked your interest in technology? What was like can you remember a turning point in your experience that made you realize like this path could actually be your career?
Yeah, there's definitely some things that spring to mind of moments where I saw, for example, like really cool technology and being like seeing that being used and thinking that that was a possibility that I could do something similar was such a creative boost. So I remember seeing some really cool like front end websites that had used React and they were really sleek and beautiful and easy to use and had a really cool user experience. And that kind of like creative element to tech was really exciting. And I think also the boom of like NFTs, I feel like there was loads of conversations about that for a long time, and that made me feel interested in the tech space. But I came from an engineering background, so it wasn't necessarily a crazy transformation, but definitely software only kind of I only kind of sparked my interest after I studied engineering. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about, because I think a lot of people come to, especially career navigation events where they've studied kind of like they've studied something traditionally that's maybe slightly connected to software engineer, but they're not software engineers. So I know that our audience is going to want to know exactly what you studied and kind of what were some of the similarities or things you had to change as you considered this the career path of a software engineer.
Yeah, so I would definitely class myself as coming from a non-traditional background in terms of not
Mhm.
studying computer science, but it wasn't dissimilar enough to feel like a crazy leap, as I kind of mentioned before. So I studied architectural environmental engineering at university and then did at A levels maths and sciences. So kind of had studied like mathematical application
Mhm.
of those kind of topics. And for me, that didn't feel like it was going to be a crazy leap into software. So when I first started applying for jobs, even before I'd coded properly, I thought that having that would be enough of a sort of foundation to be able to get into software, and quite quickly learned that that absolutely wasn't the case, and then had to kind of come up with a backup plan.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think I did have that kind of base level of mathematics, but certainly for the jobs that I was applying for, they wanted much, much more
Mhm.
specific understanding.
And also, I think another interesting part of your path is that after your original studies, you entered the hospitality industry, actually. So, what made you want to make a change? I guess on both sides, kind of taking those like few years to explore a different side of maybe your personality or brain, and then wanting to kind of change to um, uh, software engineering.
Yeah, it's funny to kind of jump from one to the other and then almost back in the same direction. But
Mhm.
after university, I saw a lot of my course friends start to apply for more kind of typical corporate jobs and started to apply for some myself. And although I was interested, I did some of the interviews and it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And I'd heard a friend talk about doing ski seasons and I'd never realized that you could do that. And I just thought I absolutely would love to have a break after university and go into the mountains and
Mhm.
do whatever job I need to do just to be able to live that lifestyle, and just had like the most incredible time out there. Meant to go for 6 months and then stayed for 4 years and just loved it. And then I guess COVID hit and I kind of realized that I wanted to make a change and leave that industry and maybe go back to more towards what I'd studied or have some sort of similarity. But I knew that I didn't want to go down the route of what kind of my degree was taking me. So that's like service engineering. And so that's when I looked into how I'd get into tech. And that was then kind of my transition from going from hospitality kind of into tech, which took a couple of years.
So you did end up studying in a boot camp. So can you tell us a little bit about your time studying? Because you're hinting at it a lot that it was like, oh, I have a lot to learn. Actually, I can't just like rest on what I thought. So how can you talk a little bit about your time as a boot camp? Were you a full-time student? Were you doing other things at the same time and kind of how that focused your path a little bit?
Yeah, I had the best time on my boot camp. I loved it, and I studied full time. I did the 10-week intensive program looking at Ruby and JavaScript, and some other bits like HTML and CSS. But the core was to study Ruby, and I quit my job and was like, I'm committing to this. I'd already knew that the kind of the work was coming to an end because of the nature of seasonal work, but I did sort of cut it a bit early and just think I'm going to commit to studying. And I just learnt so much because you're in this intensive environment, and I'm sure most people know the nature of boot camps, but just having, a support network of really highly competent coders that are giving you one-to-one attention and laying out a pathway of learning that's like each day you're building up your knowledge in an environment where you're really disciplined because you've invested the time and money into doing it, and you're surrounded by loads of other people that are wanting to work and learn at the same time. Like it's just such a amazing experience. I really promote boot camps, and there's ways of doing it, I think, in a more financially sort of easy and difficult way.
Mhm.
But the amount that you learn doing any intensive program like that is really transformational. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head because a lot of people will ask, like, is boot camp worth it? Like, what about free versus paid? And I personally don't think that necessarily that free or paid is they have pros and cons of both of them. However, exactly like you said, for sometimes it takes you to like go all in or else you don't have the motivation to finish. And so it's just important. I think it's great that you realize that you were that person that you had to put some money and some time on the line to really focus it. But one thing that can be challenging when you do these kind of intensive retraining programs is that like the learning after kind of putting your life on hold and feeling like you spent all this hours, just the nature of the industry is that that's not necessarily enough studying. So, as we start talking about your experience applying for your first job, you did mention to us before that you had to do a lot of self-studying as well. So how did you keep motivation, either after the boot camp or doing things outside of the boot camp? You felt like, okay, I paid for this program, I invested, I'm like doing 100 hours a week or something like that. And I could imagine that it could feel frustrating or disappointing that to kind of figure out that that's not like the magic solution. So can you talk a little bit about, yeah, what did that feel like and how did you work on those feelings?
Yeah, it's so real, that conversation though. And I remember even at the end of the boot camp that last week, they were really prepping us for like life outside of it and what the next steps would look like. And it is tough because you go from, yeah, having full on care and undivided attention to, although with my boot camp, and I'm sure most of the other ones, they have an alumni program so you can stay connected.
Mm.
It's still really challenging to then have to swap into just real self discipline. And I remember I had like a real curve of boost of motivation of just riding the high of after the boot camp and absolutely loving it, putting in, pretty much equal amount of hours as I had on the boot camp afterwards, and then starting to, you know, get those job applications in, maybe not hear back from them because I was still learning about who to apply for and where and
Mhm.
what and how and all of this kind of stuff. And then those dips of motivation of, oh, I'm putting all this energy in and not seeing anything out yet. And so I definitely remember feeling like after a month or two after the boot camp, that I just felt disappointed that maybe I didn't feel good enough, or maybe what I was doing wasn't right, or all of these kind of normal questions after not maybe getting a job like 1 week out of the boot camp. And I remember speaking to lots of different people. Some people managed to secure a job even whilst they were in the boot camp, and then other people were more similar to me and couldn't find one for quite a long time afterwards. And so yeah, I think the motivation was very much rested on if I'd hear back from somewhere, it kind of felt like, okay, things are going well and I can use that high to boost me on. And then sometimes I would drop off. But looking back, I think actually maybe it would have been better to rest on motivation from sort of within, of like
Mm-hmm.
having the confidence to know that you can do it rather than the external validation of interviewers or job application success.
Yeah, because so much of it is about right place and the right time. But when you're in it, it's hard. It is definitely hard to remember that. So you mentioned that your boot camp was 10 months, but then it took, you know, you're in your kind of first software engineering company now, correct? So you did have that additional time after. Um, and we have a lot of people in our community that were in the exact same situation or are in that situation now with that kind of ambiguous time between finishing the first phase of their training and having to like retrain and keep going. Um, when you were finishing your boot camp, like were people talking about kind of the state of the tech industry? Did it like increase anxiety with your classmates? And like, how did you handle that pressure?
It was definitely there. And you know what? Because I was applying for jobs over multiple years, I kind of, not that, things don't necessarily change that quickly, but every kind of period of that time period, there was always speculation about whether there were jobs or not in the industry. And so, although, you can look at the news and see if there's major events that have big impacts in the tech sort of sphere, I also don't necessarily believe that your individual experience will be based
Mm-hmm.
necessarily upon those big, like, economic peaks and troughs, because like you say, it's time and place. Like it could be a period of there's not people aren't getting hired, but then your application is amazing and they love you, and then it doesn't align with that. So I think if I were to look back, I would try to maybe block out the noise of,
Mm-hmm.
this is a tough time or this isn't going to work, because having that kind of negative talk about anything is going to naturally impact you emotionally, and that will impact, how many applications you send out, or how confident you are when you're speaking to a hiring manager, or all of these different things. um so yeah, I think it's like a proceed with caution, like be aware and you know look into things in a way that's smart, but then don't try not to let it affect you too much.
And don't scroll on people's posts on LinkedIn too much. That's my personal advice. But is there any advice, like in addition to that, not like looking at people's LinkedIn about the number of applications they've sent and things like that, but what other advice do you wish you had gotten during that time, or if you were to mentor someone right now? Um, you talked a little bit about it, but I would love to hear like, well, I just really wish someone would have said this to me.
Yeah, it's a good question. Probably a couple of different things. So, quality over quantity would be a massive one, and that took me a long time to learn. Um, I was never really just mass sending out CVs, so I was always kind of tailoring them a little bit to the company and checking the specs of the job. But still, a lot of the time at the beginning, I would just send a generic application off, even if I thought the job was really good. And that probably just wasted a lot of time. I think just the quality of an application and like, you know, putting that time that it would maybe to send 10 applications out and just putting that onto one or two is probably going to be more fruitful, especially
Hmm.
in these like really competitive sort of junior roles. But then also I think another thing for me was I was comparing myself to an interviewer sometimes.
Mm.
And I think that was also a bit of a stumbling block because I would have an interviewer that would be asking me technical questions and then maybe would go to explain them at the end or talk me through ideas and concepts. And sort of in the later stages of my applications when I wasn't as connected to people on the boot camp just because time had gone on and
Mhm.
we'd sort of lost touch a little bit. The people then that I was um, naturally comparing myself to were the people that I was interacting with, which was interviewers
Mm.
or other people that had been in the tech sphere for a much longer time than me. And then that made me feel inadequate and like I didn't know anything. And all of those thoughts are completely ridiculous if you actually look at it on paper. Somebody that's got no experience compared to someone that's got 10 years experience.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit. So now you did get you did get a job. So we're really happy about it. But you talked about having to apply to a lot of jobs, even with like deciding to go a little bit quality. So that doesn't mean like 500 to 1,000, but it could mean over 100 jobs. So before we kind of focus on the process of getting your current job, just for the last, like any last pieces of advice of how to like sustain yourself through, like, even if you can say like, oh, it's not about me, it is rejection. So did you have any like methods or tools to sustain yourself like emotionally but also financially, like through these kind of periods of putting yourself out there and it just not being the right match or time?
Yeah, it was a tough time emotionally to be able to endure the rejection and it's hard to not let that leak into your sort of your character. I had some really just lovely, amazing people around me at the time, like friends and family and a really supportive partner. And I think those things enable you to have a voice of reason that's like, it's not you, it's just X, Y, and Z. And some people being able to be like, maybe just take a break now, or, don't, or sometimes it'd be like, just keep going, you've got this. So the emotional one, it is tough, but I think the sort of resounding thing is that you're absolutely capable and
Hmm.
a job doesn't define you.
Hmm.
And then financially, it's so difficult, isn't it? It's kind of your own experience. So I was working the whole way through the last year of my application as a full-time job, because there's just no way that I could have afforded to sort of take the time out. If you could take the time out, job applications are a full-time job, so ideally
Hmm.
have a lot of free time, but it's not really possible.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But as you said to us earlier, it was worth it and you did find a job. So um, I have tons of questions about kind of adapting to your first job and excelling, but I'm sure all of our listeners would love to hear kind of how did everything align for you to finally get this position and kind of some of the day-to-day things that you're doing.
Yeah, I was really lucky that the job that I'm in now, I actually Oh, I loved it. So I applied for like a training position, I guess. So I ended up doing another boot camp, although they didn't call it a boot camp. And I learned Java in that one, which was really great. And it was another 10-week one. And they actually paid me to do it. And then
Mhm.
with the hopes that you continue to work with them afterwards. So it was actually kind of an interesting comparison of doing a boot camp where I'd paid and then
Mhm.
someone paying me to do one. Um, and fortunately, as well, they were doing a pilot program which was getting women into tech. kind of program, and so it was all women, and it was women led. And then when I got the job at the end, it was five of us from the same cohort that landed a job in the same place in the same team, and so I'd kind of had an idea before I was, well, during all my applications, that I would work in a company that had a good women's sort of sphere. And so, yeah, when I got this one, it's just so exactly what I wanted.
So it seems like you've mentioned a few times kind of like your cohort learning both at boot camp and at where you were a trainee. So how do you feel like this feeling of community like is kept you kind of interested in tech in the long term, despite, the challenges that you had?
Yeah, it's the people that make it, because having people in a similar position to you makes you feel so seen and understood. Like I kind of mentioned, it was one of my advices not to compare yourself to people that are, in a totally different phase of their career than you. I think this is the kind of like complimentary comment of that, of like surround yourself with people that are in a similar place. And so it was so great to connect with these women who had also really struggled to get into tech. And the whole point of the program that I did was to bring people together that didn't come from a traditional background. And so we all had a really unique experience together of either maybe applying to get into tech and not being successful and then coming onto this program, or people that had just come out of uni but didn't want to go down their route, whatever they'd been doing before, and wanted to get into tech. And so it meant that it it was like a really comforting feeling to know that there were a lot of people that were in a similar boat, and
Mhm.
that we all wanted to succeed and help each other succeed and learn together. And so the community thing, I think, is such a asset to learning, is just being around the right people.
Yeah. So, and I guess connected to that is because you kind of said it was almost like a second boot camp. And so I would love to hear a little bit about your thought process, or if you had any challenges kind of deciding where to focus your job search. Did you apply kind of for a mix of like places that specifically had early career programs or trainee programs and early or and like junior quote unquote positions? And if you did a mix, kind of how did it feel to kind of focus in on like going to this training program?
Yeah, I think I that was a real lesson learned, because at the beginning of my applications, I would apply for sort of anything that seemed like it had a language that I was interested in, or the company was really interesting, and I didn't necessarily look at the role as much, or the experience, or their support for a junior. And quite sort of after a few months, I kind of realized like actually I really need to focus my attention on, like you say, the early grad programs, or the ones that are just really have a lot of support for a
Hmm.
newcomer. And I had a lot more response, kind of as you'd expect from those type of jobs, where they're seeing an application like mine, which is like, you know, I could say a year experience, but I haven't got a year experience in a company. I've got a year experience of coding myself, so I guess
Hmm.
they didn't really see it like that. And definitely when I started putting, yeah, my attention into those applications where they're clearly wanting someone that hasn't got any experience, or maybe hasn't even got a traditional background, then it was way more fruitful. And
Hmm.
yeah, I kind of, yeah, learned that quite quickly.
And it meant that they were looking for you and you didn't have to like apologize for your background or feel, unsure about it, because they knew exactly like that's why they wanted you. They were interested in supporting you. I am really curious, now that you're in this position, kind of about what it's like to, be in the company and feel kind of like, okay, well, I got it, but the learning's not over yet. So a couple of things, when we were talking about your background in hospitality, was there any skills that you learned in hospitality that it really surprised you that they came up as a huge asset once you started working at this company, like as an engineer?
Yeah, genuinely, I have no regrets about the journey because I know wholeheartedly that all of the skills that I picked up from that sort of hospitality era of my life have come in handy and do come in handy every day. And that's like, an obvious one would be communication skills. But one of the jobs that I had in the mountains was working as a manager in a chalet company.
Mm,
And so you're interacting with people who they've come away on holiday, they've spent a lot of money, and they have really high expectations. And so the way that you present yourself is enormously impactful on how they receive you. And if they've got a problem and you're able to speak to them in a really confident, calm, collected way, and you present yourself well and you speak coherently and they respect you, then you get 10 miles further than if you don't have any communication skills, you can't look them in the eye and you're looking at the
mm,
floor. And so those kind of skills have all, I think, come in handy in every job, but particularly in tech, because even though you're using technical skills every day, actually a lot of the job is being able to communicate with other people in the team and understand what you're trying to do, understand what the next steps are, and be able to transfer information or like convey a message through someone else to someone else. And we have meetings all day, every day about projects and plans. And I think if you didn't have those kind of skills, then it would be much more difficult. And I do think those skills are sort of undervalued, definitely in the interview process of software
mhm.
roles, although they are considered, I think they aren't as important as obviously other skills.
And maybe it will be the skills that help you get a promotion in the future as well. One thing I would love to hear your experience or like your thoughts on is that there's a lot, I'm based in the United States, and so it is different in every single region, every single country, but return to office in person in the US in the tech industry is like people have very strong opinions, and it's very different. And the percentages, at least in the US, of who has returned to office is much lower than in other countries. But what many people feel is that early career or your first job, you lose out a lot if you're not in person or if like they don't have a supportive system. And so it does seem like it's very clear that you are at a company that has a program for early career, but can you talk a little bit about like what does your day to day like? Are you going into the office? Are you having some at home time? I know that our listeners would love to hear about that.
Yeah, I feel lucky because we're hybrids, so I'm in the office 3 days and home
Mhm,
2. And yeah, I think a lot of advice that I got when I started from seniors was that the contact hours are really important, and that's for
mhm,
like being able to get help and support, shadowing people, and networking. But for me, I think 3 days is enough time for this. And, we're connected for on Zoom the majority of the time anyway. But yeah, I feel very fortunate to have the couple of days at home to be able to get my head down
mhm,
and sort of focus. But definitely the being in the office is like enabled me to connect with people in the team in such a strong way, because you go for lunch together and get to know each other in that way, and then that makes it easier to be able
mhm.
to bother people, ask them lots of questions, and peek over their shoulder, see what they're doing.
Yeah. I guess as we're coming to the end of our conversation, but you have, I'd love to hear kind of some of your thoughts and feelings of the future, but no, I mean, no pressure. It's clear that like your flexibility has helped you a lot, but you definitely, it seems like learned a lot of resilience through getting that first job. So, um, how do you think kind of that tough applicate and long application period could potentially help you in the longer term or longer term planning in your career?
Yeah, I think, looking back, although I wouldn't want to necessarily go through it again, it definitely has taught me a lot about you can do it, you absolutely can do it. And it's made me really grateful for the position that I have now. I'm really grateful for the team that I'm in now, and has enabled me to sort of even pick up a lot of skills that you learn through interview processes and what people are looking for and how to sell yourself and market yourself. And know that if you can get through those times, you can do lots and lots of other things. And so yeah, as they all say, yeah, you have to climb the mountain, but then you get to reap the rewards at the top.
Have you gotten to sit in on interviews yet? Yet the other side of the table?
Not yet, I wish. I would probably hire everyone, so it's probably not good for me
Yes,
to be
I
in that.
understand. I understand that. So is there anything you'd like to make sure our listeners leave this conversation with, um, or yeah, as we close up?
I I mean, I know that if somebody's listening to this podcast, no doubt they have the skills. If there's someone that's struggling to get a job, and you're doing this, you're listening to this in your spare time, there's no doubt that you're probably doing enough work and putting them, the energy and time into getting it. And it's exactly as you said, it's timing and it's the right time, the right place. And things do fall into place in the way that they should. And so, yeah, there's no doubt that it will happen in the way it needs to.
Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you so much for talking to us about your experience. And it was a pleasure meeting you today.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me on.